So it is 10 o'clock, and it is time for us to introduce Bill Shireman. He is the driving force behind getting cutting-edge climate news to the public. His own Solution Citizen is an inspiration to those building the fledgling climate restoration industry. All right, here's Bill Shireman.
Good morning, all, and welcome to, I think, one of the most important of the conversations that we have happening at EarthX this week. I have about 5 different talks in my mind. I've been going through, well, maybe I should tell them this, and tell them this, and tell them this. But what I'm inspired to do, in recognizing my friend Hunter Levins over here, one of the leaders in this arena of seeing the relationship between nature and the economy and natural processes and human well-being, is to tell you a story of how I learned that understanding how to protect natural systems has provided a path to understanding how to protect ourselves and how to harness those natural systems for our benefit. Now, I've been an environmentalist all my life. When I was in single digits, I learned about the overpopulation challenge that we were facing. And in 1970, we were facing a population crisis. Based on the trend lines at that time, it looked like we would have mass global starvation within 10 years. That was going to be our fate, and we needed to take immediate action to deal with that. Now, countries like China took evasive action by instituting, not at that time, but not long thereafter, the single-child policy to try to drive down their population. But what happened within that 10-year period was, instead of mass starvation, we experienced a technological revolution, a green revolution that radically expanded the amount of food that we produced. And more important than that, the human species somehow came together and drove down fertility numbers in ways that we did not think could be possible. At that time, we had fertility in the developing world of 5 or 6 children per birthing able woman. And those were driven down to about 3 or so over a generation. Hunter probably has much better numbers than I do. And then in the developed world, where we were at 3, it was driven down to 2 and below 2. And what drove that was the liberation of women, the education and empowerment of women, with women having more choices in their lives. And so we had higher survival rates for the children that were born. We had women that were making other choices in their lives. We drove down that impossible curve. And if you compare the success of the China approach, mandating a change, mandating a lifestyle, it had the reverse effect. Fertility rates actually went up because people were trying desperately to have a single male child. And instead, it had the opposite effect. But allowing freedom enabled us to solve our own problem as a collective. So we survived that 10-year period. When I was 20, the energy crisis emerged, and we had gas lines, and the gas lines were extending around blocks, and I was out, in these gas lines petitioning to have the oil companies split up, because I saw this as, the result of an evil, oil industry conspiracy and so on, and so we had to block the oil companies because we were about to run out of oil, and it was going to become explosively expensive. And then within about 10 years or so, we saw a transformation in the economy, where microchips, which had been invented in the 40s and 50s and in response to war planning and investment, microchips entered into the economy like never before. And what microchips did is they took power that we had been required to exploit resources and burn oil and so on. And they embedded knowledge inside our products and services more and more, so that we had a smarter economy, a more efficient economy. We could get more done with less. And we broke what was called the iron law of energy GDP, that we had to consume an increment more of energy in order to drive an increment more of economic growth. We found ways to grow while shrinking the size of our products and the size of our footprint, at least incrementally. We became a more energy efficient economy. And because of that, we actually created a glut of energy production in that decade, and we saw prices decline. So instead of the disaster of an energy crisis, we generated an energy abundance during that time. Now, the problem is we ate up all that abundance by consuming even more resources and more microchips and more computers. Now we have 17 phones and 14, computers, and we didn't watch that top line. So then we had in my third decade of 10 years, we were losing our rainforests. We were losing our natural ecosystems, the lungs of the planet, as they say. We were destroying rainforests. And we still are destroying rainforests at an aggressive pace. And there seemed to be nothing that we could do about this. These were voracious companies that were out there destroying rainforests, and with groups and partners like Hunter Levens and Amory Levens and the Mitsubishi companies and Rainforest Action and others, we converted an attack on the companies by environmentalists, a war on the companies, into a negotiated settlement where the environmentalists worked together with the companies that were consuming resources and managed to create market demand for sustainably harvested timber products. And once major retail and consumer brands signaled to the marketplace that they wanted sustainably harvested timber, the marketplace responded. And the marketplace delivered a new certification system, multiple certification systems over time, so that we would be able to identify certified timber. And the consequence of that has been about 400 million acres of forest protected around the world as a consequence. Protected imperfectly, certainly, and plenty of skirmishes happening. But we managed to turn the corner on that and learn how to protect the present while protecting the future. And now we have a thriving sustainable timber industry globally. Again, plenty of problems that remain. Now we face a global climate crisis. And we have all along, of course. It's not that these crises suddenly emerge. It's more like we notice them. Oh, here's another manifestation of the fact that we're eating away at nature too quickly and that we can't sustain ourselves. And we look out and we say, well, this is an impossible problem. Look, donors have spent about $100 billion, I estimate, since about 1990, to convince the population to take immediate action to prevent climate change. About $100 billion. This is just in philanthropy. This is not in, building, wind generators and so on. And the consequence of that philanthropy, the bottom line right now, is that atmospheric carbon levels are at their highest level ever in history. Temperatures are at their highest level ever in history. The trajectory is only going up in the wrong direction. And the politics of climate are hotter than ever as well. We've turned climate into another of those high-profit wedge issues, along with abortion, guns, immigration, race. Climate is the fifth of the wedge issues that are actively utilized, actively exploited by the political and media industry because it's profitable. Because the political industry, that set of industries, and again, I don't demonize anyone. We have to recognize we have these systems operating with incentives that are not beneficial to us as a community. And so rather than condemning those who happen to be part of the system, You kill those people and they're just replaced by another generation of people. So there's no benefit to demonizing a group and trying to eliminate them. It's not a human problem, it's a systems problem. But we have a political industry of lawyers and lobbyists and communications folks and political strategists and politicians and political power brokers and leaders who profit by keeping the public evenly divided between a left and a right, a red America and a blue America. And they utilize, they harness the extremes that are expressed in red America to disgust blue America so that blue America cannot engage. And they take the extremes of blue America and they highlight and amplify them to red America so that red America cannot engage with blue America. And we imagine that this is the war that's preventing us from actually solving problems, and that one side needs to win in order to deal with the problems that we have. But we know that that doesn't work. This is just classic colonialism. It's classic, a power coming into a country, dividing the population so that the spoils of that country go to them. So we've created a political system, a political industry that divides the public so that our $4.5 trillion in annual spending, not counting wars, not counting, COVIDs and a trillion here, a trillion there, $4.5 trillion gets to be managed by this political industry, a $30 billion industry in charge of dividing up $4.5 trillion among the various interest groups. And that's the political industry. And now the media industry has discovered that same business model, that they can thrive by selling advertising that is custom designed for red America or custom designed for blue America. And when you have a program, for example, that attracts both red and blue America, it gets great ratings, they say, no, we're not interested in that because that doesn't fit our demographic profile. That's not efficient advertising for us. It may be very popular, but we want efficient advertising, so we have to advertise to a red audience or a blue audience. And so that industry is also profiting, doing the way they do business in ways that keep us divided. And so we're unable to take the actions that we need to take on climate to solve the problems that we face. Now, the simple solution to this, among others, is to cross-fertilize here, to take folks, the ideas of the left, the ideas of the right, and bring them together. The people of the left, the people of the right, and bring them together. And I learned how that happens and why that's so important in the rainforest. But I first learned about it in my own backyard. A generation or two ago, when I was trying to pass a California bottle bill, this is a law publishing deposits on beverage containers, and I was facing the evil industry opposition I felt at the time to that. But I just bought a house, my first house, and it was at the edge of development in Sacramento, California, and my backyard, I wanted to turn it into like a Garden of Eden, and so I went into my backyard and I got my hoe and I got my shovels and I dug out a channel that was my creek, because I love to have a creek. So I dug out a creek, put some rocks on the side, put some plants in there, it looked lovely. And over here I put a little garden, and over here I put some trees and so on. And it was gorgeous for a few days or something. It was gorgeous. This is nature. This is, for me, this is like nature. And then we had a hot summer, which you do in Sacramento, and it burned my little flowers to a crisp, and all those nice little plants, it burned them, and they were pretty much decimated. And then we had a verdant spring, I guess, and these bugs formed little suburban developments on the backs of the leaves of my trees. And you couldn't even see it from the front, but in the back it was like eating away at the leaves, and so it was destroying the trees. And then the winter came and the rains came, and the water pooled in the backyard and flooded down my little creek and just tore out everything. And by the end, it was just a disastrous failure, I suppose. But at that time, we were at the edge of development in Sacramento, and I looked out in the back, beyond, and this land that had been stripped bare by, human tractors had begun to repair itself naturally. And there was natural growth all the way that the eye could see. Beautiful plants and flowers that were just coming up and planting themselves and thriving themselves. And I thought, well, why didn't I just harness that? That's, it was an unnatural start, but to a natural ecosystem. And so when I got involved in protecting rainforests, in working between corporations and activist groups, Mitsubishi and Rainforest Action initially, and then others after that, I went to the rainforest in order to learn what we could do to protect the natural environment. And I learned, a lot of the problem was there's no private property, no designation of responsibility for these lands, and so basically whenever somebody would have acquisition of an area, they'd want to exploit as fast as they could because they didn't know what next government would come into place and who'd be selling off, favors. Something fortunately we don't have to deal with here in the United States. I just don't think. But in those primitive countries, they didn't have the stable, rule of law. And so things could be exploited pretty quickly. But what I discovered in the rainforest was not just how to protect the rainforest, but I discovered some of the principles of the rainforest that we could harness to protect us. And I began to realize that this linear, top-down, command and control assumptions that we make about nature, that we can kind of command and control it into the form that we want, the linear throwaway economy, is not really the economy that we're a part of. We're a part of this circular system. And how does a rainforest prosper over the long term? Well, a rainforest is a complex adaptive system, and all complex adaptive systems have a formula. Two formulas, I'm sure it's only one when you dig down to it, but two formulas that I found fascinating. First, they have repeating phases of development in the rainforest. If you have a fire that clears an area in the rainforest, that transformation leads to an open environment where 1 million different kinds of seeds sprout. That's the phase of birth. The phase of birth. You have tremendous diversity, but not any kind of interconnectedness among those. And that phase of birth is then followed by a phase of growth. What grows in that period? What grows, because you have straight sunlight and minerals in the soil, is the fast growth, highly fertile, what I would call the industrial species. Here, in California, we have pines, and there we might have mangroves. Very fast-growing, fast-seeding, highly fertile, fast-dying species, and they are the first to dominate there in that period of growth. Now, if you allow that process to continue, once the growth period, you've reached the end, and there's no more space to grow, these voracious species don't have enough sunlight to excel any further. So they reach a level of stability. But what they've created among them are niches. Niches that are appropriate to every one of those other seeds that didn't succeed in the period of growth, but now they have a space for themselves. Now you have a diversification of the forest from what we'd call a jungle, hardcore, difficult, to a rainforest. And you begin to have complexity and the emergence of qualities. And when you have complexity, you have different species that are there together. They grow interdependent without knowing it, but they grow interdependent on one another. You have a complex adaptive system close enough that if there are disruptions, one species is lost and so on, others fill in the space and co-adapt so that everything is interdependent. And with that interdependence, you have the combination of certain qualities that may be isolated in one of those species. And when those qualities combine, you have the emergence of new qualities that have been lying latent in nature, capacities that are there but not physically present yet. We all know that, that subatomic particles, all the same, if they are organized together as atoms, you have 150 elements, right? Each one of those elements composed of exactly the same stuff, but each one of them exhibiting completely different qualities because of the arrangement, the design of the stuff. Then you combine those elements together to form molecules, and each molecule releases new qualities not present in the parts. Hydrogen and oxygen, neither of them are water, neither of them they behave like water, but when you combine them, they become water, and then you have a set of qualities that emerge from nature based on that code. And those molecules come together as cells, and cells lead to life. And when cells combine with cells and become complex cells, then you have consciousness and awareness, and you have humanity, and you have civilization, and you have all of us, and we're expressions of that natural process that happens in that complex time. And then periodically, you have overgrowth and dead wood and so on, and a part of the forest burns. And in that part of the forest that's burned, you open up the land to yet another phase of birth, growth, development, and transformation. And I believe that that's where we are right now in the story of humanity, that we, the industrial era, is that high growth period, an exuberant childhood, an important childhood, one to celebrate because of the mastery that we've shown over the planet and over resources, but also one that, like all childhoods, leads to adulthood. And now we are challenged to become adults, to become aware of the power that we've wielded, and now to be more guided by nature in the paths that we take forward. The wonder of this conference, and that Peter and folks have pulled together, is that we are now looking at nature as a guide to our future in humanity. And I think we will find that rather than replacing all of the forests of the planet with solar farms, that maybe the forests themselves will turn out to be the best solar collectors, while they also are creating habitats and petri dishes for the creation of more potentials that lie latent in nature. And that we may not need to look at the future as a time of great pessimism and challenge, where we have to sacrifice what makes life worthwhile in order to simply live, but we may discover the richness that nature has in store for us if we restore ourselves to our place within nature, as a part of nature, as an expression of nature, not as consumers, but as creators that have been created and that continue to create value, some of which we know of and are aware of, and we do consciously, much of it that happens in combination with each other in ways that we can't even predict. And so I celebrate the fact that you all have gotten together, that we have all gotten together this morning to explore those possibilities, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you this morning. Thank you all.